Good morning, everyone. Those who are tuned in, I'm just checking to make sure that audio is working correctly. We are slated to begin at 8:30 this morning. So we have a couple more minutes, but I just wanted to confirm that everyone is in the right spot for Workshop 5, talking about communication strategies. So we'll begin in a little bit. Okay, good morning to those who have just logged in. We are going to get started. I'm going to give it one more minute for some additional folks to join us in the event that they are still grabbing their cup of coffee for this morning. And if you wanted to refill your cup, this would be a great time to do that before we dive in. Okay, good morning. We are going to go ahead and get started. I won't belabor us. So welcome, good morning to all of you. My name is Precious Miller and I am the coordinator of My Best with Michigan Center for Student Success. And today is the My Best Workshop 5. And our focus today is going to be about communication strategies. So I hope that you have your notebook and a pen handy. You have your laptop open open, ready to take some notes, because this workshop is packed with lots of content and opportunities for everyone to share what's working and troubleshoot what might not be working the way in which you intended to. So we'll be talking about communication strategies, both student-facing communication strategies, and we'll set the groundwork for looking at ways to strengthen communication strategies within your institution. I am joined by my amazing MCSS colleagues, Jenny Shanker, Erica Oriens, and Katie Giardello. We are a dynamic team, and I really believe that when our forces combined, we are a strong, dynamic group. And so if any of you have questions, or if we could be of assistance or support to you in any way, in anything that you have going on in your realm and in a circle of influence, we make ourselves available to you all. I also have our Twitter handles listed underneath our name. If you think that we are amazing in a virtual space, you've seen nothing until you followed us on Twitter and LinkedIn. So I welcome you to join us in those spaces. We are on both of these platforms. We do have quite a following on Twitter and are building our network on LinkedIn. We have some amazing MCSS mentors who have recently released a LinkedIn article regarding guided pathways. And so there's lots of great content that we share in these digital spaces, but also fostering an opportunity for institutions to connect with one another. So if that is of interest to you, where you are looking for additional ways to link arms with other individuals, birds of a feather, if you will, this is a great place to begin and follow us in this way. If you are new to a workshop with me, I am no stranger to community and engagement. I actually love it. And I miss that in-person touch. And so I do my best to offer an opportunity for everyone to engage in a way that they feel is comfortable and suitable for the environment that you are in as we are in this virtual space. I do offer you an opportunity to rename yourself if you haven't done so at this time, but also to add the institution or organization that you are representing so that we have an idea of who it is that you are. We are going to be doing some breakout rooms later on in this workshop, and so that would be a great way for other individuals to get to know you and the institution or organization that you're representing. I also welcome anyone to use the chat function. I know many of us are very comfortable and familiar with this, but if you have a really great strategy, or if your institution has really beefed up a website within your institution's website that you want to share with your colleagues, please feel free to place that in the chat. And if there are other publications or articles that you've been reading over the course of the summer that you think would be helpful to foster strong communication channels, I welcome you to share that in the chat as well. And if you have questions, please feel free to share those with the group. So we are going to begin with an exercise or an opportunity for us to see who is in our virtual meeting room. And so this exercise is going to involve everyone in the chat sharing your name, your institution, the institution that you're representing. And I thought it would be interesting if you could share the best life advice you have ever been given. The best life advice you've ever been given. Take a minute and think about that. The best of life advice I've ever been given is do or do not. There is no try. My husband says that I am all gas, no brake. When I set my mind to doing something, I do it 110% full throttle, no breaks in between. And so that life motto is something that really stuck with me. So what's the best life advice you've ever been given? I'm navigating to the chat here. Don't wrestle with the pig. You'll both get dirty and the pig likes it. Be kind. Yes, these are so good. Any other life advice that really stuck with you? I can't necessarily pinpoint where I picked up this life advice, but as you think of the life advice that you would like to share this morning, some questions that you could ask yourself is, was this message communicated to me clearly? Did it intend to communicate the message that the sender intended for it? And what was the impact of the advice that was shared? That's Yoda. Thanks, Rob. Life advice: treat others as I would like to be treated. The golden rule. Yeah. So, whatever life advice that was communicated to you, regardless of when you received that information, think about the communication stream in which that advice was given. Was it given verbally? Was it something that you read? Was it something that you observed and just interpreted as your own? We're all communicating things day in and day out, and this life advice is no different. And so, as we are talking about communication strategies today, these are some things that you could begin to think, to have top of mind. What is the intended message if you are the receiver, or if you are the giver, the sender of the information? And is it what you're communicating? What is the intended goal of what it is that you're communicating? We're going to be talking about communication strategies for students, cross-department communication strategies. The whole gambit will be laying the groundwork, as I understand that strengthening communication strategies is not just a one-time conversation. It's not just a one-time deal. It's something that is ever forming and ever growing. And so I hope that this was a nice teasing introduction to our conversation today, as you begin to think about the communication strategies you would like to strengthen in your circles of influence. So here is our agenda today. I hope you all feel comfortable and welcomed. I do welcome you all. Thank you for the time that you are sharing with me and with your colleagues across the state today, across the country today. We are going to be talking about communication strategies to improve student access to supports. And we have some dynamic speakers that I am looking forward to introducing. We also have some college highlights. One thing that has been very clear to me is that hearing from your peers, hearing from your colleagues is something that has been very impactful. And so I want to make sure that we have an opportunity to highlight institutions who have strategies that they would like to share. We're also going to go into breakout sessions, and I have been into some virtual spaces where you hear breakout sessions and everyone cringes or runs for the Zoom exit. My ask is that you stick around for this portion of the workshop, because it does give you an opportunity to connect and to collaborate with individuals who are also trying to navigate helpful communication streams so that students have access to supports. And so we'll talk about what those breakout rooms are specifically going to entail and what you're going to do for, a half hour. It's not going to be boring, and I believe it's going to be the best use of your time, and that you are going to walk away from this workshop with actionable strategies that you can begin to put in practice at 11 o'clock today if you wanted to, at tomorrow if you wanted to, and strategies that I believe will be long lasting after the workshop has concluded today. We're going to share as a group the dialogue and conversations that were had in those breakout rooms at about 10:10 this morning, and then we'll conclude with next steps as we look forward to the fall semester and what else MCSS has up our sleeve. And so I would like to switch gears a bit and pass the baton over to our dynamic speakers who are going to be sharing their wisdom, their expertise, their knowledge and understanding with us today. We are joined by Rob Johnstone, Priya Shaplot, and Leslie Neal. Leslie Neal comes to us from Montcalm Community College, and we have Rob and Priya from National Center for Inquiry and Improvement. I believe all of you have the ability to share your slides when you feel comfortable to do so, as you share strategies to help us improve our systems to make sure that students have access to supports. So I am going to stop sharing my screen and allow for you all to take it over. Thank you again for sharing with us today.
Thanks, Precious, for the introduction. And I, for some reason, although I've been on Zoom for the last 16 months, I'm using the same computer I used for 7 hours yesterday on Zoom. It's decided this morning, no video. I've tried to reboot, not sure what's going on. We're just going to go with the ghost in the machine. Luckily, and I think perhaps even more luckily for you, my portion of this is very brief. I'm going to get out of the way and turn it over to Priya and Leslie pretty quickly. But it's great to be with you again. Thank you for joining us. We know July is a time where a lot of people are out, and so we appreciate you for being here and being with us today for this really important topic. And really, in this next half hour, I'm going to talk for a couple of minutes, hand it to Priya for a couple of minutes, and we're really excited that we have Leslie Neal with us to be able to share some of her wisdom. Just a quick story of how this came about. As we were talking about communication strategies, I've had this unformed idea in my head for about 2 years on this. And this finally forced me to at least get the starting workings of this down onto a slide. And I was talking about it with Erica and Precious and Priya. And I think Erica was the one who suggested that we maybe talk to someone who actually is an expert in communication. So that's where we got to Leslie Neal, who is a communications professor, among many other things, at Montcalm, and we really appreciate her. And as soon as I talked to her ahead of time, I said, it's even more so that I'm just going to get quickly out of the way and let her actually talk about what's really going on. But really quickly, I want to kind of talk about this idea that's been forming in my head. And this really, this is about student financial stability, but it really is about any change that is going on your campus. And I was thinking, here's why this came up. A lot of you know, Priya is much more the expert in student financial stability than I am. My expertise tends to be more in the culture of evidence, culture of inquiry, and guided pathways side. And I was thinking a lot and reflecting about how many colleges, and many of you, I've been to your colleges in Michigan, have been on this guided pathways journey for a long time. And I'm always struck by, I've actually stopped being struck by the novelty of how many colleges I go to that have been working on guided pathways for 2 to 4 years and still are asking me and others to do keynotes to get that knowledge to a different, broader part of their campus. Because it is shocking to them at the campus that there are still many people who don't know what's going on or really how they can be involved. And I just in my head started thinking about this notion of concentric circles. The idea that there's a core group of people who know a lot about a given topic on a community college campus. There's a second level, a third level, and maybe a fourth level. The number of levels probably debatable. But and I started thinking about this with communication and engagement and this notion that, let's take student financial stability. You have a core group of leaders on your campus. You are probably those people. You and some allies are those people who are very focused on providing student financial stability and providing a more integrated and institution-wide approach to student financial stability. That group is usually very small. Deep amount of knowledge, deep amount of engagement. There's a second level of people who probably are knowledgeable about student financial stability and some of the things going on there. And they're actually making some individual efforts, but perhaps are not connected to the institution-wide efforts that are going on. And you can think of these are the people on your campus who have food in their desk drawers, who have other solutions, who have their own ways of helping students. They're making individual efforts to help students with financial stability. There's a third level of people who probably see the need for the college to do more about things like student financial stability and working on providing supports, but they're not really connected to anything that's going on campus. And then there's a fourth level, and I just kind of said, these are the people who are really, they're disconnected from it and frankly don't see this student financial stability as something that is a college responsibility. This is the very common thing we've talked about before of perhaps the folks who think that we're not a social service agency, this is someone else's problem. And I was just thinking about in this particular student financial stability that this is an example of how your communication and engagement strategies around your student financial stability work have to be targeted to each level. So what's the messaging you're giving to level one? These are the people who are in the middle of the core of the work. They need to talk with each other. They need to be updated on where things are going, but they are in the core of knowing what's going on. People in levels, as you move out in the concentric circles 2, 3, and 4, and the groups tend to get larger, as the graphic illustrates, that you need different messaging. And engagement is similar. What are you actually asking people to do? Your level one core group of student financial stability champions are the ones redesigning the system. They are the ones who are making the changes, but you're not asking people in level 4 to redesign the system. You're asking them to do something perhaps very specific in their worlds. And on the right side of this slide, you can see that the messaging and the ask has to be more concise as you move from level 1 to level 4. So you can't bombard people in level 4 with 25-page papers that are asking them to do 93 things. What you're hoping to do is simplify the message and target it to them and ask them maybe to do 1 or 2 things. You've heard Priya talk about things like student services syllabi and postcards that we can give with resources to frontline faculty and staff. Those are potentially, hopefully, level 3 people who you can bring in perhaps more to the core and integrate them into the campus. And so this is just a way in my head of thinking about and kind of separating this issue that I know Leslie's going to talk about in a second here, which is that communication and engagement have to be targeted to the audience. You could cross this, by the way, and crosswalk this with, by the way, what messages you need, for example, the full-time faculty or part-time faculty or frontline student services staff. But even in each of those cases, you're going to have people who are more in the know and are more level 1 people involved in the changes. And then you're going to have a lot of people who are in those more concentric circles moving out. So just a way to think about targeting the message, and then hopefully we'll set up Leslie, who I know has some slides. I'm going a little deeper on it. And Priya, I want to hand it to you to talk a little bit about slide 4 before we hand it over to Leslie.
Great. Thank you, Rob. Good morning, everyone. Nice to be with you. I wanted to take just a minute and focus on kind of a transition of the Maslow's hierarchy of needs that we're familiar with, and just reshare something I may have shared in a previous presentation around the notion of Maslow's hierarchy rewired. This is a concept that came from Dr. Pam Rutledge, where she purports that for humans to be able to access these different elements of the hierarchy, another way to think about it is centering communication, connection in the middle of all of this. So for a student to be able to access basic needs, or for a student to be able to access the services, the core of how they connect and keep connecting to the services becomes even more important as they go through their journey. And so I know today we're going to be talking about how we make sure that that connection, which can take the form of a person, whether it's a dedicated person inside or outside the classroom, in student services, outside student services. It could be a team if your college is considering or designing student success teams. It could be a place, whether it's a one-stop shop on campus, a hub, or it could be a place virtually, whether it's a website, the web page, or your LMS or your Canvas shell, whatever it may be, but really thinking about how can we make sure that students know about the supports that are available, not just when they onboard and through their first semester or their first year, but what I call the love connection, that they find what they need, when and how they need it, and how we can frame these supports in a way that normalizes their use and also destigmatizes these supports, both for students and for those who support students, because as students go through their journey, those people are going to continue to be very critical in the student journey. So we're going to talk a lot more about this through Leslie's work, also through the panel of college practitioners that we have in just a little bit. But I really want us to be thinking about how do we ensure that students get what they need, when and how they need it, and how can we support those that support students in those ways as well. I'll hand it over to Leslie.
Thanks, Priya. And now to the part where we get out of the way and Leslie actually tells us what you really should be thinking about. So with no further ado, and we're really excited to have Leslie here. And Leslie, the floor is yours. You can share slides and we look forward to hearing from you.
Sounds good. Thank you. All right. I am going to get this rolling, sharing my slides. Can you guys see the slide, or are you seeing my outline? Slide, okay. Usually I have a little green rectangle that pops up, and I missed that if it popped up, so my apologies. So thank you, Rob, for the wonderful introduction. Thank you, all of you, for having me today. And if you notice, right at the beginning, I have something for you to read, something for you to lean into. I have been in higher education for over a decade, and my formal studies have been in the discipline of communication studies. And one thing that continues to ring true is that in order for us to be successful and effective, we have to lean into inspiring a shared meaning and letting go of this idea of commanding a focus and demanding compliance amongst the people that we are talking to and that we are communicating with. That is often our downfall when we do not acknowledge the fact that we need to allow others to have that agency in acting on the information that we've provided to them. And so I'm going to give you a focus there, and I want you to try to remain in that mindset of how, and continuing to ask yourself as we talk this morning, how do I inspire shared meaning? And how am I enabling others to act? How am I providing that agency? Now, I wouldn't be a proper prof if I didn't start you off with a model of what interactional communication looks like, right? So let's start there and make sure we're all on the same page. And you see that shared meaning bar there. That's important because I want to make sure that my understanding of what interactional communication is shared with you, right? That we're on the same page. And that's what that shared meaning represents. This idea that I have a message, or the source has a message, and that source is sending that message to a receiver. And in order for that receiver to be on the same page, we've got to be able to share that meaning of the message, right? That content idea has to be a shared value. And then in order for me to understand, as the source sending that message, if you indeed understood and have that shared meaning, I'm going to gain that insight through feedback, right? And that feedback loop is super important. So out of the two things that I'm sharing with you here, and if you've seen this model before, you know this is a very simplistic version of the model. There are lots of other bells and whistles that we can add to this. But for today, we are focusing on that sender, the source, and the idea of having that feedback loop, because that feedback loop is going to tell us whether or not our message landed appropriately, right? That feedback loop is going to say, thumbs up, yep, I completely understand. Thumbs down, I don't even know what you're talking about, or something in between. Right. And so we really have to make sure that we are leaning into the idea of setting up feedback check-ins when we create content on campus and distribute it out. As we think about this interactional model, we want to be honest with ourselves about what communication looks like on our campus. And so I'm going to provide you with a visual. We've got our organizational communication, and we understand that our organizations communicate in some facet. And yes, there is a model for that, right? When we are thinking about these models, a lot of times, idealistically, we look at that wheel network and we say, that's how we communicate on our campus. We have a single entity that's pushing out content, that's pushing out an initiative, and that initiative is being targeted to each group or each person that needs to receive that information. And then this idea of A being that centralized source, A connects with B, right? And B doesn't talk to anybody else. Any feedback that's being given is going right back to A. Idealistically, that's how we like to think about things, right? This idea that the flow of communication is very neat and organized, and whenever I send something out, it comes right back to me. But we know that the reality is we're working with an all-channel network, right? We know that when one person sends out information, people are going to talk amongst themselves, right? This idea of D and E can have a conversation without A ever knowing about that conversation. And so because this is how we actually communicate on campus, because this is how we truly operate, we need to lean into that. Instead of pretending as if our ideal network is actually happening, let's lean into the fact that the reality is people are going to talk beyond the original creator of the content. Feedback is going to happen, and it's up to that original creator to lean in and put an ear to the ground to make sure that they are really obtaining the information and the shared meanings that are being expressed, right? Because what happens when the integrity of that shared meaning is lost? If you don't have that feedback loop in place, that's a problem. Right? And so for each line that we see from A to B, C, D, and E, that line cross connects, right? We know that that's a two-way continuum. We know that A and E. A doesn't only send information to E, but E has the opportunity to send information to A, right? And so we need to be mindful that we are leaning into the feedback that we can discover throughout campus. And so I want to present this all channel network to you with this idea of that shared meaning being in the center, and then talking about some of the stakeholders that we have on campus, right? And so if we look at this idea of having these various stakeholders, and let's say for an example, campus closes, right? And so we send out a message from administration, starts that message and says, campus is closed today. We send out that information to all of our stakeholders. Do we have feedback in place in case our message does not land appropriately, right? What if a student shows up to campus because they think, oh, campus closed means that no class today, but I can still use the rec room, right? There's a disconnect there. And we need to make sure that we have the feedback loops in place to ensure that that shared meaning holds its integrity. Something was lost there, right? Student says, okay, I get it, campus is closed, but they are not grasping what that message truly means, right, from administration. And so we need to make sure that we have the people in place. And one of the ways to do that is to have liaisons in that group, right? In each group and each stakeholder. Rob mentioned the idea of the level ones, the people that are definitely in the know. We need to have an ear to the ground with those people so that as they are connecting with others in that group, we're hearing what the murmurs are, right? We're not always going to be there to hear those sidebar conversations, but believe that we can put people in place and put systems in place so that we have a better idea of what's going on. And we can do that formally by doing focus groups, by doing surveys, but we can also do behind the scene analytical processes where we are double checking to make sure that people are even receiving the message, right? Looking at message readership. Informally, having those sidebar conversations and check-ins with people that are a part of that creation group, going out and just having those conversations over lunch with people. Hey, this information was shared out. What are your thoughts on it? How are you internalizing this, right? Getting an idea of whether or not the integrity of that shared meaning is still there. Now, in saying this and showing you these models, there are best practices that we can use. And to be honest, these are universal best practices. They can be used regardless of who your receiver is, if your receiver are students, faculty, or beyond. And so I want to take the rest of our time to really talk through what these best practices are, because I think that they are an important piece when we are considering how to craft a message and how to make sure that that message comes back to us, right? Get that feedback loop connected in there. And so as we think about best practices, the first thing that we need to acknowledge is that we need to know our audience. Who are we thinking about when we are crafting this message? And Rob noted the fact that not everybody is going to need to know everything, right? And so we need to be intentional about the message that we're crafting and making sure that we are very clear regarding who needs to know what. And as we figure out who our audience is, that is going to allow us to create that clear message. It's going to allow us to really be intentional about our target audience, providing them with the quality of information that they need, right? Because we don't want to bury them with more information than they need and then our message gets lost. We also don't want to provide them with so little information that they have more questions than answers. So it allows us to really provide clear quality information to those that need it. And then of course, following up with either that verbal message with either written message or an opportunity to even provide some visuals to go along with that message to make sure that we're hitting multiple channels when we are sharing information with campus. Additionally, we need to make sure that our information is being provided in a timely manner. And not only that, but that it's equally accessible. So when I say provided in a timely manner, have you ever had a situation where information starts to leak out and people are having sidebar conversations about initiative that hasn't even started yet, right? We want to get on top of that and make sure that we are pushing out content timely, right? And that might mean even giving little exciting blurbs saying, hey, we got something coming down the pipe, right? The way you know to do that is through those feedback loops. Oh, people are talking about this, right? We need to get on top of this and share a little bit. Otherwise, that message is going to get lost and the integrity of that message is going to be compromised before we even push out the actual intended content, right? So get on top of that ahead of time and make sure we are providing timely information and then making it equally accessible. Meaning we don't want to give information to half of the faculty and the other half of saying, well, why am I out of the loop? How come I didn't know about this, right? You guys want me to do something in my class and I didn't even know this was happening. So making sure that that information is accessible to all that need to have it, right? And being sure that that accessibility is for the content that you would like for that targeted audience. We also want to encourage discussion. And if you remember back to that original slide, and I talked about making sure that we are encouraging others to act, right? Making sure that we are enabling them to act. We want to encourage discussion because what happens when we encourage discussion among peers and colleagues or amongst students, this is going to build camaraderie and it's also going to boost morale, right? It's going to give people an opportunity to say, hey, I have stake in this. Right? My conversation is being heard. And the way that they know their conversation is being heard is that we have those feedback loops in check, right? We're encouraging discussion in meaningful ways and we're listening to what those discussions hold, right? We're encouraging people to say, hey, yeah, talk about this, have a conversation about this. And by the way, we're listening, right? We're listening to you when you say that, you're visualizing this differently than the way we intended, right? We're hearing that, we're listening to that. We also know that when we encourage discussion, this is going to help initiate positive attitudes, especially when we are gearing up for change, right? Because when we gear up for change, people are putting their battle gloves on just because it's change, right? We don't like it. We never like it, myself included. And so how do we push for that change in a way that allows people to feel like they have a say in this? And that's through encouraging discussion, right? That's through saying, yes, we want to hear you talk about this. And we're not just feeding content down your throat and saying, you know, chew it because it's good. We're giving you that content. And we might even be saying, yes, you have to eat it, but we want to hear whether or not you want a little sugar sprinkled on it, right? That's the idea of that encouraged discussion. It's not to say we want you to change the message altogether, but we want to know how you're feeling about it. We want to know what you're thinking about it. And we want to know if there's something that we can do to help make this message more clear, make it more understandable, or make it even more palatable, right? This connection to encouraging discussion leads right into ensuring that there's a feedback loop, right? We do a disservice to ourselves when we think that we've got feedback loops in place, or we think that we are communicating effectively, and there's nothing set up for us to hear what's happening when that message is received, right? Sending out an email from a no reply account, that's a disservice to us, right? Or not allowing for there to be a contact person with that email that's sent out. That's an easy way to allow people to have feedback, right? It's something simple, but a lot of times we don't think about it. We say, well, I sent the message. I don't know why people are saying that they don't understand. Because we have to make sure that we are doing our part. And I can't stress enough that it's up to the sender to make sure that the receiver gets the message, right? So we can't say, well, I didn't intend it that way and I'm not sure what's going on. No, we're the sender. So if people are not receiving that message the way we intended, it's our job to follow up with that. And the only way we know if people are not receiving that message or not receiving it with the integrity that it was sent is if we as the senders follow up with that feedback loop and are really paying attention. We put an initiative together, no one's doing it. That's feedback, right? And we need to discover why that's not happening or why it's happening in a different capacity than what we intended. So as I come to my time is almost up with you, I'm looking at time and trying to be sensitive because I know you guys have a lot of other things that you're doing this morning. I want to ensure that I am closing with the idea that you need to lean in, and I am encouraging you to lean in to this inspired shared meaning, right? Allow people to walk alongside you with the meaning, with the integrity of your content, and also allow them to act on that, because that's going to create an opportunity for them to truly engage, right? To truly take on a role and find themselves in the initiative, right? When we enable them to act. And so I want to leave you with that encouragement. I am going to provide you with my contact information in the chat if you need to email me about anything, but I do have just a couple of minutes, Precious. If people have specific questions, I'm happy to answer them. And I know that you've got something else that you're planning to do in about 3 minutes, so.
Yes, anyone with questions, please fire them in. Thank you so much, Leslie. As I said earlier, I fully expected you to do exactly what you did, which is put some real actual theory and expertise behind some of the informed ideas a lot of us have around this. I mean, I took a lot out of that, but one of the big things was this idea that if communication, if someone is saying there's a communication problem at the college, which is happens roughly 100% of the time, the onus of responsibility is actually mostly on the sender, right? To have not thought through that process and that feedback loop. And we hear this so often, Leslie, when we send out the email or this or that, all of those things we hear constantly. So that really struck me in there as well. And just one other observation I'd throw in that I've heard from another organization, SOVA, that we work with really well around. You talked a little bit, alluded to this, the difference between engagement and trying to get buy-in. It's really where you started, Leslie. Our friends at SOVA said that buy-in is a very dangerous term. They have this Dilbert cartoon that shows you that what you're really trying to do is get someone to approve a decision you've already made without their input, as if they were part of the process, right? And this is not what we're looking for, is two-way communication. We're looking for feedback. We're actually looking for engagement in this work, and then thinking about it at the various levels. So questions that anyone has in chat for Leslie before we hand it over to Priya? Observations from the field.
Thanks, Rob, for your synopsis. I can't stress enough that idea of having that engagement versus that buy-in. Absolutely. So I'm glad you were able to pick that up and even craft it in a different way for people to get that repetition, right? Because it's one of those things where we think it's never us, right? Oh no, I did what I was supposed to do. It's not that simple. And even though we've been communicating all our lives, we still have stuff to learn.
Yeah, Leslie, and I would say that my administrator friends, I used to be one, talk way too much about getting buy-in from practitioners rather than engaging practitioners. And I think if you try to unpack some of the faculty versus administration structural tension that exists at many colleges, a lot of it goes back to that issue, which is you're not truly engaging people. Whether you're talking about shared governance or not is really, the words I actually don't care too much about. What I care more about is this notion of engagement. It's why NCII spends so much time talking about design, that we are designers of the student experience, because people can be engaged by being designers, right? Rather than working on a task force or working on a committee or being told what to do or being asked to sign on to something. So not a lot of questions coming right now, but Leslie, thank you so much again. And you were wonderful, and I'm glad if we had more time, we would give it to you. But we also have some practitioners coming up here. So if everyone can thank Leslie for her contribution today, which was massive, I will then hand it over to Priya. Thanks, Leslie.
Thank you, guys. Thank you so much for having me. Enjoy your morning.
Thanks, Leslie. Thanks, Rob. And I think when I'm hearing you talk about communicating with practitioners, I'm also thinking about how we do a lot of crossing our fingers when we talk to students, and how we put the information out there in a website or an email and cross our fingers that they'll be able to find what they need. And so thinking about like intentional ways to ensure that students get the information they need when they need it, and that their feedback loops to let us know how that's being used. I am so thrilled to be able to facilitate a panel with a couple of practitioners that are near and dear to all of us. Would just want to double check that they're both here. Hi. So I'll go ahead and begin with Lewis Thomas from Kalamazoo Valley Community College. And then Nicole, you're here as well. Hi, Nicole. So Lewis, would you mind just introducing yourself a little bit about the work that you do, and maybe just a brief, what is the role that communication and engagement show up in the work that you do there.
Yeah, thanks, Priya. Good to see everybody again. My name is Louis Thomas. I'm the director of Kalamazoo Valley Accelerated Associate Program at Kalamazoo Valley Community College. I work with low-income students. We have a program that's designed to support those students to help them graduate within 2 to 3 years. So that's my primary role with the institution, but also in my role, I work collaboratively with the college population as far as just like sharing best practices and working to, better support our students' basic needs. So as far as communication, one of the things that I think we've done really well during the pandemic is, utilizing our TargetX system to kind of communicate with students. We found out right away during the pandemic that students were receiving a lot of emails because there's so much information we wanted to share with those students. But when talking to students, a lot of them would miss emails or they would feel overwhelmed because it was just so much. So the institution wanted to make a targeted effort to maybe spread those important communications out a little bit. And TargetX has been very valuable in helping us do that. So basically, whether it's communicating events that used to take place on campus that are now happening in virtual spaces, we kind of use TargetX to do that. As we kind of transition back to having some things on campus, we've transitioned to having some things like outside, weather permitting. So we use TargetX as a vehicle to capture students that are interested in registering for those events. But what's cool about it is it also allows us to kind of cap those events because we still have to observe the COVID-19 protocols. So TargetX manages all of that for us. So students can register and then we kind of get an idea when we hit that cap. And then students get an automated message either directing them to another time or another event. So it's been very helpful in that regard. Also, just with the case management, again, with students not being on campus, we knew it would be very important to try to keep those students engaged some type of way. So our advisors and some of our specialized programs are really using it to implement some targeted messaging. So, we have caseloads now that are also identified in TargetX, and that's something that's also automated by pathway or by a program alignment. And then each advisor or program can kind of like determine what messages they want to go to students during each time during the semester. So if finals time is approaching, they can get a message just encouraging them and supporting them and reminding them of the resources that are available on campus. So those are just a couple of things and a couple of ways we've been able to engage students and keep that communication going during the pandemic.
Great. Thank you so much, Louis. Nice to see you. Good morning. I'm going to switch it over to Nicole very briefly, and then Louis, I'd like to actually come back to a couple of things that you mentioned as well. So Nicole, would you mind just introducing yourself? I'm so glad that we're reconnecting after a little bit of time, but please go ahead and share a little bit about the work you do at LMC and just the role that communication and engagement play in your work.
Absolutely. So my name is Nicole Hatter. I am the Director of Advising at Lake Michigan College. Thank you for bearing with me. This is like my second day in this office, so we're still working the webcam issue out. So we have a kind of a similar system to what Louis has at KVCC. Actually, we use TargetX on our admission side of the house, but then advising uses a system called Navigate. And so within that system is where we store our advising assignments. Faculty can also get in there and view their class lists and take attendance. And so we kind of had some of the similar issues that Louis mentioned. When we first had to go remote, there was a lot of email because we were trying to make sure that everybody got information about what to expect. And so one of the things that we did and have continued to do is make sure on our college main page, but then also our students' portal page, that we kind of put some information about what to expect. So now that the campus is open, but we're still in and we're still out, there's a message there to say to students, hey, please don't just come to campus. Please call first and make sure that the person that you or the service you're looking for is here today, because we might not be. We also, through Navigate, something that we found really worked for our students is we have texting. And so a lot of times it's texting them to check their email. So, hey, we sent out a really important communication today about return to campus services. Please read your email and let us know if you have questions. And we send that out to our advising loads so that then they can loop back in with their advisor. The other thing this system did was allowed us to finally get to the point where students could schedule their own appointments. And so this was great. You know, trying to play phone tag with students during this time we found was really difficult. This gave them the ability to set appointments so that they knew they had a set time with us. And we're, even now that we're back in, we're leaving a virtual option open for students, because we did find some of our students really liked that. They liked doing a phone or Zoom appointment, both for advising and for counseling. We found actually they've been really enjoying that feature. Some of the other things that we looked at were just simply kind of as we went through, particularly in those first few weeks that we were, you know, had to shift so abruptly. We just sent text messages to say, hey, how are you guys doing? Like, we know this is really rough. We know you didn't sign up for 4 classes online. How are things going? And students really, we got a lot of feedback. Hey, things are they're going okay. They're going really rough. So I think the texting was really beneficial for us. It's a good way to reach them. The other nice thing about this system, and I'm sure Lewis has had these issues too, it's web-based. So whether I'm fighting with my remote desktop or not, I can still get into it. I can still send messages to students. And, you know, on days that I can't get into my phone, I can send them a text message to say, hey, we're having technical difficulties. Can we flip this appointment around? And so I think that's been really key, and just kind of listening to how students have responded to those messages has been great, but they like the option, and then they can text us back too, which is wonderful. And so that makes it something where it's quick and easy for them to respond to our message if they have questions, and it logs everything so that I can go in and say, okay, so this is who I sent things to. This is how I sent it to them. Which makes it easy on our end to go back and either replicate communications or, you know, beg, borrow, and steal from other communications so that it's not quite as arduous as we go through. And then something else we've been doing is we put together a really comprehensive appointment follow-up email with things like, here's all your important fall dates. Here's the 5 different class formats that we're offering, and we're highlighting the ones that we've talked about that you're registering for. Here's our link to our bookstore. Here's, you know, financial aid's information. Here's IT's information. And we're sending it, because we're doing it in their appointment, to both their LMC, and because there's nothing 5 alarm in there, to their personal email as well, so that we know we've kind of hit some of those points again for them. Before they start the semester.
So one thing that I'm noting in both the experiences that you're sharing, Nicole, and also what Lewis you shared, is the role that different technology services are playing in kind of facilitating the communication. So I'm gonna ask us to consider a challenge, which is to talk about the design of the student communication with or even without the technology support. So can you talk a little bit, Nicole, about the kind of design you had in mind before you went into, say, Navigate, which, if I understand correctly, is a relatively new system that you're using. So if you could talk a little bit about, what did you notice that your student communication efforts were or weren't doing? What was the kind of challenge you were addressing? And how did you think about the different kind of student experience, or what Leslie was talking about, the impact you wanted to have, and how that kind of went into the actual designing of the system.
Sure. So I think the main kind of light bulb that we had when we were able to switch to Navigate was we realized we were trying to do a lot through phone calls, and phone calls just weren't working. Lewis probably remembers this from his time here. We'd pull a list of students with phone numbers, and somebody would sit down and they'd go through the list, and very rarely did we actually get a live person. And so we realized, as we've kind of gone through this the last couple of years, calling them just doesn't always work. And so we knew we needed a way to try and get the information in front of them. And then also obviously be FERPA compliant, because that's always an issue when you're reaching out to students. And so, you know, you're watching them in your office and they're sitting here on their phone, you know, texting each other, texting their parents. And we went, well, yeah, that's how they're communicating. They are communicating via text. You know, our marketing department does some things with Facebook. They do some things with Instagram. We haven't really moved that direction in the advising office, but we realized we kind of have to meet them where they are. And so text messaging was huge for us. We had purchased ZipWhip before we switched over to Navigate, just so that we had a way to try and get information in front of them more quickly. And then we realized, you know, obviously you only have 160 characters in text. So you have to be brief, you have to be pointed in what you're telling them. And that is part of why some of our texts are, hey, we sent you a really important email. This is the title of it. You have to go in and read it. Because some things you just I can't explain everything, but quick things like, you know, I need to switch the time of your appointment, or, hey, I got a concerned note from your instructor. Can you give me a call, or can we set up a time to talk? Some of those things that lets them know we're trying to get a hold of them and kind of spurs them to get back to us. And then at least we know our system is set up so that they get a text, and if the number doesn't go through, then it goes to their LMC email. The other thing we've really had to think about is trying to keep the emails as brief and bulleted as possible. And luckily in our office, we always have work studies. And so a lot of what we send out before we send out, we run past them. How would you, if I sent this to you, how would you read that? And they're really a great fountain of knowledge in terms of, this isn't really clear, or is there another way that we can word this? So that we're trying to make things pretty obvious.
I appreciate you mentioning these. The pieces that I'm pulling out, Nicole, from what you're talking about is, one, how can you provide more just-in-time support for students that almost acts as like the highlight section of the more dense inbox that they would have of all the things that they could possibly ever need to know. So you're almost using text messaging as a way to just lift up what is relevant and needing action immediately for students. The other piece that comes is this notion of readability, and how, coming back to what Leslie was talking about, like our desire is to give them all the information they need to know, especially when the character limit isn't even a question. In emails are quite generous, and you can write paragraphs and essays. And so thinking about how to chunk the information out and lift it up for students is critical. And I really appreciate this notion of not just using, like elevating and amplifying the student engagement in this process, and having students be the kind of filter to ensure that there is the impact that you're trying to have on the students as they read it. So Lewis, I'm going to kind of switch back to you. Something that when Precious and I were talking about the work at KVCC, something that came up was around the way that you have kind of reframed and normalized access to a variety of student financial stability supports, including basic needs, through your intake form. So I was wondering if you wouldn't mind spending a little bit of time talking about what that intake process is like from the student's perspective, and then how you use the information from the form to figure out what types of support and what types of communication you want to kind of personalized for the students based on what they say in the intake form.
Sure. Yeah, so our intake survey, I really love what we're doing with that form. It's constantly evolving as we learn more from our students. But basically what it is, when a student goes to register for fall classes, they'll be redirected to an intake survey, very short, multiple choice survey. So far, we've never exceeded 10 questions. This fall, it'll be 9 questions. And basically what we're trying to do, we're trying to gauge, what students may need from us. We've looked at stop out data and just kind of learned from that. These are the reasons that students tend to stop out. So we want to get in front of that if we can. So we're asking the students prior to registration. We're looking at class schedule. We're also looking at payment options. How do you plan on paying? And then we're also looking at those basic needs like transportation, childcare. And this upcoming fall will be, there's a housing insecurity question because, again, the data is showing us that this is something that is emerging as a huge challenge for many of our students. So basically, once students complete that intake survey, again, we have targeted communications that are ready to go. And again, we rely heavily on TargetX to help us convey this messaging to our students. So for instance, if a student indicates that paying for college is not something that they figured out, we'll refer them to a couple things depending on how they answer that survey. So if we see that student has not completed a FAFSA, we're going to refer that student back to the FAFSA application, and then we're going to provide financial aid contact information. If the student has completed a FAFSA and they're not Pell eligible, we'll refer those students to other resources, other financial assistance resources, and also our payment plan option. So it just kind of depends on how each student answers the survey question. Obviously, for students who indicate like food insecurity, we have the Valley Food Share. So again, that automated message with that link to our food share sign up is sent to that student. That student can sign up very easily, takes about a couple of minutes, and then they're set up for food share. But also that student's information goes to our Life Resources department. And a lot of times that department will also do some additional follow-up because they want to talk to the students and then again have that conversation about other resources that might be available to them, whether it's in the community or within that office. So that process has worked really well for us, and we're supporting a lot of students through it. And it has really kind of helped us streamline our process where we can get connected to that student a lot sooner than later. We're being proactive in finding those students instead of them having to find us, which has been a huge challenge for us in the past.
I appreciate you mentioning that. So as you can imagine, Louis, there's already interest in accessing your intake survey. Is that something that you could share with other folks? Maybe we could share it with Precious and Erica, and then we can
Absolutely.
send it out to others as well. And if any of your colleges out there also have an intake survey, we'd love to see it, because I think there's something about the types of questions that are being asked of not just specific students, but larger groups of students that by its own nature helps normalize that basic needs, for example, are part of ensuring that you're able to successfully move through your educational experience. And Louis, I was wondering if you could talk a little bit more about how you have thought about normalizing these services and even reducing the stigma associated with accessing services like food and or housing, et cetera, because I think this is something that's relevant not only in the beginning, but throughout the student's journey as well.
Absolutely. I think for us, and we've had some initial success with our food share program, simply by, promoting it, I think. We provide recipes in those food share boxes. We have students who are sharing those recipes, sharing their meals, posting them to social media. This is what I made with my KVCC food share box. So that's helped us quite a bit. But I think the other piece is just informing our staff, our faculty, so that, we are all comfortable having these conversations. I would like to see this discussed in every classroom, like the first week of classes. And just to have that conversation and just to say that, hey, there have been many before you who have had these same challenges, but we have resources that can kind of support that. So I think the more we talk about it, the more our students are comfortable talking about it, we can kind of destigmatize the need for those basic needs amongst our student body.
Could you also, and this is the kind of last chunk I wanted to cover. So we talk about communication that is directed out to students. And then there's also the communication that's directed to practitioners, to faculty, staff, and administrators, so that they know, are aware of, can support students in getting them closer to the services they need. Can you share a little bit about what you have found to be useful in expanding the awareness and knowledge of faculty and staff in supporting basic needs for students?
Yeah, key word is awareness. I find that just sharing the information is key. A lot of times in institutions, and I think the slide referenced that, there are certain people who are your champions. They have the information, they have all the data, but then there are other people at the institution who don't see that data. I just think it's imperative that we share that information and have conversations around it. This upcoming fall, we are scheduled to share our Trellis data in a college-wide capacity so that everyone is kind of aware these are the students that are in your classroom. I think a lot of times, we may have faculty who are not aware that these students are among them. So we have to do a better job of sharing that data and sharing that information. And I think that will go a long way in helping us kind of break down these barriers and heightening our awareness.
Thank you so much for that, Louis. And Nicole, I would ask you a similar question. I know that you've moved mountains in terms of ensuring that the advising team at LMC has clarity and knowledge of the kinds of supports that are out there. I'm curious how, if you were to take Rob's kind of concentric circles, if you think of you and the advising team and you kind of move out beyond that, can you talk a little bit about how you are supporting or engaging other faculty, staff, administrators to also be able to be engaged in this?
Yes, so we kind of borrowed the idea, I think on one of our financial stability calls, we created a student success syllabus is what we're calling it. And so we took kind of all of those different supports that we have around the college. So tutoring and mentoring and counseling, and we put it in one spot. And we had our provost send it out to all of our faculty and adjuncts to say, not that you're not welcome to swing by the advising office and ask, but here's at least a starting point for you to flip through the book and kind of see what is available to students. And so I think that was really helpful for them to kind of get an idea of, okay, so what are we doing? Because initiatives change all the time. And so this is something that we send out at the beginning of the semester to say, here's what we have. These are the hours of the offices. We've really tried to, when we send anything out, either to faculty or students, here's the general email for this department, and here's the general line, so that we're directing them to something that's always checked, as opposed to giving them Nicole's email and then Nicole is out for 3 days with a sick kid. And then I have to route them back to another email anyway. So working with that, our faculty also have, I call it contractually obligated training days at the beginning of every semester. And so our provost has always been really great about saying, hey, is there anything that that we need to put in front of faculty. And so I've come in and presented on filing, we call them alerts, some people call them Karen concerns. When we hired our new counselor, we paraded her in and said, this is our new counselor. Now you've seen her face. We'll send out her email information, but she's here. This is what she's covering. Be gracious. She just started, those sorts of things. And so that's always been a good time to kind of get in front of faculty. And then it's nice because then they ask me weird things that I wouldn't have even thought that they needed to know. But then they're all in one room because they're all required to be there. And so we try not to take up too much time, but that's been a great way to put new services and new initiatives in front of them, and give them the chance to either ask questions then, or sometimes they'll kind of stew on it for a little while and then I'll get follow-up calls and emails. And so I think that's a way. Our deans are also really great about, they have an academic leadership council. We'll go there and present things and say, okay, deans and chairs, you guys need to take this back to your departments and then follow back up with us. And so I think, having those good partnerships so that we kind of know when they're all together and we can say, hey, can I have 5 minutes just to put this in front of them, has been really beneficial in trying to get services in front of them, and just other information.
I appreciate that. There are a few pieces that come to mind. One, the kind of initial sentence that Leslie had around inspiring a shared meaning and being very clear about what you're asking of people to do is kind of what you're talking about. And the student services syllabus is an example of that because you're making it very clear what you mean about the components of success. And you're also humanizing what somebody does to access it, which I think is really important. The pieces to kind of, I know we're at time now, but the pieces that I want others to take away is that you're probably doing aspects of this work already. There are extremely effective communications taking place at your own institution about certain efforts or practices. And so really be kind of picking up on what you know to work in certain spaces on your campus, either with students or with practitioners, and thinking about how to elevate that to amplify other types of messages as well. And I'm just quickly scanning the chat. Louis, Erica had a quick question for you to just clarify. Can you clarify that you automatically follow up with additional information?
I was just typing it in the chat, but yes, it's automated, and that's the beauty of Target X. You know what I mean? We don't have to manually go in and make sure that we follow up with all these students. It's automated, so at the very least, they get the message, they get the contact information, and they get the resources. And then again, our life resources department, will follow up as well.
Right. And I really did appreciate that kind of the human aspect of this is that the life resources folks are then seeing what a student said they needed and also then finding other supports that might also be relevant for the student, something that humans especially can do, right? And so I think that there is this balance of what technology can provide us in terms of automation and ease, but there's also the kind of human ingredients in designing the technology to ensure the kinds of student experiences that we're trying to put forward as well.
And
Are there
I would just point out that from
Rob?
Leslie, I mean, the notion of, Priya and I have a long conversations about technology and business processes, and what Louis is describing is a designed system of a business process then interacting with humans at certain levels, and a call to action that has the feedback that possible that Leslie was talking about. So I do think there is this tendency when you hear stories like this to focus on we need that technology. And we'll again say that we know of numerous colleges who do this without technology by having systems. And the technology is a part of a business process and a culture that produces these things that both Louis and Nicole are telling you about. But I would say to you, don't leave thinking the technology is the critical piece. It is a piece. But I just was yesterday doing another presentation in Ohio, reminding folks about the work of Santa Fe College, an Aspen Prize winner in Florida, who was doing alerts and My Academic Plan type stuff in 2003 using spreadsheets before there were any software, because they knew they needed to get the information to their students about what they needed. And so you can do all this without technology, but the technology, certainly TargetX, by the way, makes it easier. By the way, we could also tell you of colleges who have technology like TargetX and are not using it very well, right? So what Lewis is describing is a system that has the actors involved supporting students in a way that's highly intentional. So yeah, exactly. And you get the data analysis, Lewis, is great part of it as well. So the technology is great. All of that is possible without it. It's just a little easier with it, but the focus isn't the technology, it's actually on what you do with it. So.
And I think I'll piggyback off that, Rob. The technology doesn't replace the human touch. Just because I have a system where I can text students, that's great. I still have to have the person here to follow up. And so, you know, I have these great technology pieces, but if my VP walked into my office now and said, Nicole, you can hire 2 more advisors, I'd say hallelujah. Because the other thing that does is it makes it easier for people to alert concerns, but that means you still have to follow up with them. And that still takes a warm person to do that.
I think that's a very good note to end on. So thank you, Nicole. Thank you, Lewis, for sharing your perspectives. Rob, always appreciate your insights. And I'm looking forward to the conversations that follow about the work that you're doing at your own institutions around this as well. Precious, back to you.
Thank you, Priya. Thank you, Nicole. Thank you, Lewis, for everything that you shared about how you are using tools as just a strategy to support the work that you're doing to connect and communicate with students. I appreciate the perspective that you were able to offer to us and everyone here in our virtual space today. We are going to shift gears to our breakout rooms. Don't cringe. Don't cringe. It's going to be okay. I am going to list a link in the chat for everyone to be able to access, fingers crossed, successfully access the Google Doc. Inside that Google Doc, you will see some instructions on the very first page about what it is that we're asking you all to do when we do send you into your breakout room. So the activity is, or the exercise, the opportunity is for everyone to go into the breakout room. The breakout room that you are assigned to is going to coincide with the breakout room scenario that you and your group are going to discuss together. Your scenario is about communication strategies and specifically looking at what you can do to improve the communication of the scenario that you are assigned to. And so there are 6 specific prompts that you will be asked to answer that relate to your scenario. After you have completed your scenario, we will bring you back to the main breakout room for us to talk about it as a collective. And if there are any questions that arise as you are having your discussions in your groups, we'll talk about it at that time. Because we are an intimate group at this time, we are going to have 3 breakout rooms. And so Erica is going to send you into those. When you are prompted to go into your breakout room on your screen, just note what breakout room you are assigned, because that is going to be the number scenario that you and your colleagues are going to discuss. If you have any questions, we will be available via chat. Have a great breakout and see you in a bit.
Okay, so I'm going to send you to breakout rooms, but I'm going to tell you your number and then I'll create the rooms. So I've got in room 1, number 1, I've got Darby, Dinah, Lewis, and Nicole. In room 2, I have Heidi, Megan, Nicole Hatter. Sorry, Nicole Case was the first one. Nicole Hatter and Tracy Johnson are in room 2. And then in room 3, I have Jenny, Lorraine, and Priya in room 3. So I'm going to open your rooms now. We have 2 additional scenarios 4 and 5, that are in there as well. And then you'll see an example that Precious and I put together on there as well, just to give you a sense of how you might want to answer some of those questions. So I will open those rooms. and send you there.
Do you want me to go to a room?
Katie, you can if you want. We're using the compression planning questions for it, so.
Oh, I see. I may skip it if that's okay. I've got
Sure.
something I need to work
That's
on.
fine.
That's
That's
fine.
Okay.
Good
so
job, Precious.
Oh,
Thank you. And thanks for tweeting.
No problem. I'm always good for a couple tweets.
I should have written it. I don't know why I just didn't write it on the document, who they were. Precious.
Yes.
Still 10-10.
Yeah. Do you think they'll need extra time? I think we're going to end early no matter what.
That's fine. I think
Yep.
ending early, nobody's ever upset about that. So,
Yeah.
cool.
Leslie was great.
Oh my gosh.
She was
Yeah.
excellent.
Yeah.
She was really good.
Yeah. I mean, I think, yeah, there's just so much strategy around what people could be doing. And, I think I like that you picked LMC and KVCC. Boy, KVCC is really,
Mhm.
I mean, they're working on this.
You know what they're doing that I don't hear other people talking about? It's integrated. They're all talking to each other.
Mhm.
And that unfortunately is what I felt was missing from Leslie's thing is, yeah, we all have a role to play in the communication systems, but there are people who control the messaging and people who don't. And
Right.
that access can be challenging to navigate if you don't have an integrated communication or organizational structure.
Mhm.
Mhm. And I think Nicole, she's attempting to do that when she was talking about, parading the advisor, but there is no set system.
Yeah.
So if Nicole left tomorrow,
Right.
who's going to know to do that?
Right.
Mhm.
And there's culture is so important to that too, because so many people want to hold on to their closet door and keep it closed. You know what I mean? I don't know. It was great. I could see her giving that same presentation in all of our initiatives with a slightly different focal
Yeah.
point.
Couldn't
Like,
you?
yeah, it's literally what we all do. And
Mhm.
and we manage that on a macro level. And then the colleges, have to deal with that more locally. But those power dynamics, I think, are important to think about too. Who has access to the information? Who's allowed to post on communication boards or manage certain communications for the college?
Yeah,
Interesting.
it is. And I was hoping that we would have some more people in attendance. There were more registered than actually attended. And I feel like the people
July.
who needed to be in this room weren't
Not-
necessarily.
yeah.
As usual, yeah.
Well, that is how it goes. And I agree, Rob, July, people are burnt out, man. People are burnt out of the virtual meetings, of all of it. It's tough.
I was really glad just from a content perspective too, that Lewis brought up the housing insecurity issue. Precious, this has come up in Precious and I's conversations like twice in the last 2 days. So this is the third time actually. But it is true. I mean, twice as many students in the survey were housing insecure compared to food insecurity. And while I think that the food pantry is valuable, like, and the housing issue is just so much more problematic. And,
Right. And it's harder to support in some ways.
Oh, much harder. And particularly, I think all of the colleges along the lakeshore, I mean, you think of it but I mean, really everywhere, everybody has their own housing concerns, but I thought that was certainly something to elevate.
I also keep thinking about the employment issues that are not unrelated to this, and like all of the crazy public rhetoric about people don't want to work. And I'm like, no, the system is rigged against these people. Why would they work if they don't make enough money to support their basic needs, provide safe, secure housing.
Yeah, I went home, obviously my teeny tiny town, and they're all complaining about, they can't find anybody to work. And so I was like, let me just look at the data here. And,
Of course you did.
of course. And I'm like, the unemployment rate is 3.5%. And even if you look at people who exited the labor market, it's only 7.5%, which, 3.5% is basically full employment.
Right.
Not a big, nobody should be concerned that 3% of people are unemployed. But even if you go up to like 7.5%, if you consider, but like the population hasn't changed, 25% of the population is over the age of 65. So, there's this perception that there's these like able-bodied, middle-aged people
Correct.
who aren't
Yes.
working.
Right.
But what seems to have happened is adults who are 55, 60, 65 have said,
I'm good. I'm not going to
I'm
die.
good. Like
Yeah.
I'll struggle through till I
Right.
can,
Yeah.
till I can make it through. So, I'm like telling my father-in-law, like, maybe you should go back to work. Like
Well,
it's your
but
age group that's
it's what
exiting
I'd
the
be
labor
curious to
market.
see the data, because it seems to be service level jobs, right? And I'm about to get up on my soapbox about capitalism and the inequities in the system. But like, if all that remains true on the macro scale, and unemployment is not actually out of whack historically, it's the service sector that is suffering, and that's an income disparity issue. It's not about people not wanting to work. It's about the income disparities that we live within because of capitalism.
Well, I also think there's, I'm not, the foods, especially the food service and restaurant industry, because like the fact that they closed for so many months and
Oh yeah.
people were able, I also think that it's sort of an industry specific issue because,
Mhm.
You lost
Mhm.
all of those people could go find jobs someplace else if they chose to. You could go work at Walmart or
Right.
Meijer or Target or, like one of those types of places that are still open. And I think it's really hard for those food service places that were closed for so long to attract
Sure.
new people. And we even see it with our programs, like the colleges that have culinary programs say, they hardly have any students in them. It's so
Mhm.
responsive to the labor market. Why would you start a program if every restaurant is closed? You start a
Yeah.
culinary program where every restaurant is closed.
Yeah.
So I think that there's some,
Right.
like shifting in industry that happened
Just
too.
Yeah.
What's
The
that?
rest.
teaching especially.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, and then childcare. I was telling Erica yesterday that my sons went to a great camp that's right around the corner from our house earlier this summer. I'm so glad they got to go because it had shut down because they have inadequate staffing, and they didn't share more detail to understand if they were fully staffed and then something happened, or if they just never got up to full staffing for larger size groups. But all of those parents are now out their childcare plans. You know what I mean? Like, it's just kind of wild.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And then the bus drivers, we keep getting like emails asking us if if we want to be bus drivers. I'm trying to get Julian to do it. I think he would be a great bus driver.
And then you have these individuals going back to inflexible buildings
Yeah.
when they were doing the same work virtually
Right. Right.
with no
Yeah.
child.
Well, and it's a reckoning. It's truly a reckoning. So it gets at what we're all talking about too. Like, we've all decided to make changes to our own lifestyles because of what we figured we can and can't endure over the last year. That is true in childcare. That's true with the way we source our food. That we never went out a whole lot. Our family never went out a whole lot, but we actually began doing takeout far more often in the last year because we wanted to support local businesses. And that has been a wonderful blessing to me because I like to cook, but every day, so that has been something that's been interesting. And then some of the businesses, you can see they're reframing their business to make that more part of their thing rather than having everybody come in and sit and eat.
Yeah. Yeah.
But I don't know. It's kind of wild. There's a lot. I also think a lot of people are just unhappy and like, or figured out they were unhappy, or now are making decisions to become happier, maybe because of choices that they couldn't necessarily choose, but had to make over the last year. I don't know. It's tough stuff. All right, I'm going to go offline. I got to take care of something real quick.
Okay.
I'm gonna go look in the doc and see what they're doing.
Okay.
Uh-oh, I'm not seeing breakout room 3 and write anything, or 2, or 1. Okay.
Okay. Wow.
Do you want to put a note in the chat? Or maybe I can,
Oh, I'm seeing people in the document,
me too.
just not writing in it.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, yes. Um, you can use the space below your given scenario to write out your strategy. We will regroup at 10 a.m.
Yep, I see it. And I set my timer too.
Okay.
Put them back together.
Okay, it looks like group 3 is getting ready to go for it.
Good. I'll be right back.
Okay. Welcome back. I hope everyone had a good breakout. I am going to ask for one person from each breakout to share their scenario and how you answered the 6 prompts. And if there were any questions that came up, feel free to share them with the group. So let's start with breakout room number 1.
I don't know if they're back yet, Precious.
Oh no.
There we
I
go.
knew you were gonna say that, Precious, as I was trying to type into the document.
There you go.
Okay.
No, but, we had a good breakout session. A lot of great ideas came up. Our charge was to communicate basic needs, support services to third-year students who were a little bit removed from the orientation and first-year experiences. So we wanted to get a message to those students. So we just kind of talked about, what specific message we wanted to convey, and that message was that the basic needs supports are available. We talked about maybe sharing some information tied to student success. I know at our institution, students who take advantage of basic needs supports, have a lower stopout rate, a higher achievement rate. So maybe just highlighting some of those things. Obviously, the goal would be just to heighten awareness amongst those third-year students, so that we can increase the usage rate. And again, so we can see some positive student success gains from it.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Did any questions come up in your group as you were talking?
Yeah, I mean, we had a very good discussion on several of the questions, but, I think question 5, who leads, who's responsible? And I think that kind of varies from institution to institution, but I think what we settled on is we wanted this to be something, that was done collectively. Obviously, we want to have leadership on board with it, but, we thought it was really important to have both sides of the house, so to speak, involved. So we talked about student services and also the academic side of the house, all having, a critical role, pivotal role in relaying this out to students. And, we had a really good discussion about, how we do that. I think Nicole brought up the Stall Street Journal. Remember that, Nicole? So again, we had a conversation about how, really putting this out there for every student, where it's not a stigma, because the expectation is when you see so many times that it kind of reduces that stigma. So again, we talked about just having it everywhere. I think Darby brought up the point where we can have like cards. So, we equip our staff, our counselors, people in functional areas with these cards that just kind of highlight our basic needs services. So we can use that as a prompt when we're meeting with students so that we don't forget. And it's an easy reference tool. And even with those, we can have those in classrooms and things like that. And we talked about faculty maybe, mentioning it, having it in their syllabi, but also mentioning it during pivotal points in the semester. So week 1, but then also during midterms, also after Thanksgiving break, periods where we kind of look at the data and see like, okay, there's a shift here where students are not coming back, or we're losing some students. So just really just having it a collective message from, all parties at the institution is kind of what we kind of landed on for that.
Yeah. I really like the idea of the card as well. Thanks for sharing that, Darby. It reminds me of having a pocket-sized version of the student success syllabus that Nicole was mentioning earlier in the panel discussion. And, when you were talking about who's responsible, if we have someone who's responsible, then it would be easier for that feedback loop to take place. But then it reminds me of when Leslie was talking about the sender is the responsible party to make sure that that message was received successfully. So I like that you guys were able to have some conversation around that. Let's transition to group number 2. What was your scenario and how did you answer the 6 prompts?
I
So-
don't mind. Oh, sorry. Go ahead, Nicole.
Nope, go ahead, Megan.
Okay. So our scenario is that a department on campus learns of a community resource that could address student basic needs, but a lot of students don't go to that department. So how do we get that message out? And we were really focusing on where the message is coming from should probably be relevant to what the resource is. So if like a science faculty member learns about a student food pantry that might really be helpful or something like that, we don't necessarily need to increase student traffic to the science area. We might need to instead partner with another group on campus, either a student organization or somewhere in student success that already does have that communication with students, make sure they have the message and that maybe they can take it over. So yeah, we don't really need science faculty to be overwhelmed with questions about food pantries. We need to just kind of shift where it's coming from.
Mhm.
And we also talked about how we will tell them at LMC and at Muskegon. There's already some like a weekly student newsletter is what Heidi talked about at Muskegon, and they could put some information in there, or posters on campus, a student facing resource page, make sure that that's updated, and kind of where that work lives and who's responsible is kind of similar to who will get that message out. So we'd want to make sure that there is a contact person, there is a contact department, making sure that the contact information for the actual resource is always available to students and always clear to students, so that we're not over promising what they can do. Or something that Nicole pointed out that I thought was a good point was that might be a small community and you don't want to show like preference supporting one resource over another. So kind of making sure that students know, hey, this resource is there, you can contact them. If you have other questions, we might be able to help you and direct you to the right way, but not necessarily overly promoting, I guess, like one place over another, because there could be a lot of different options for supports that we want to keep all those things open.
Mhm. Very good. And I like how you guys spent some time just making sure that the message was clear. That reminds me of what Leslie was talking about with making sure that the message is accessible to everyone. And the concentric circles, right, that Rob was mentioning earlier, like it starts with the science faculty member, but switching that communication stream and then broadening it out to make sure that everyone is aware of the resource. Very good. Thank you for sharing for your group, Megan. And then we transition to breakout room number 3.
So we were a small but mighty group with myself, Priya, and Lorraine, and we didn't really. Lorraine started the conversation by saying that our scenario had actually happened on her campus because Henry Ford is in Southeast Michigan, impacted by 100-year floods, and so then that got us off on a tangent about talking about what really happened and what the college, how the college responded. So we ended up really not completing our assignment till almost the end. So we're not completely done. But it was a good conversation because for me, and I'll let other people talk in just a sec. I'll let the other people talk in just a second. But the thing that struck me is, in the context of the My Best project and the kind of services that we're trying to provide to students, how ingrained or automatic is it for the college to, the college messaging centers around what's open, what's closed, when you're, what is the impact on the services. And to that end, like to what extent is it automatic also for colleges to reach out to students and say, how are you impacted? Did you lose your car in the flood? Did you, was your home flooded? Were you displaced? And that's not an automatic connection. The college is like, okay, I got to get information about how we are affected to students, but we have to add to that this idea of how have you been impacted and how can we help you? So that was what struck me about the conversation.
I just want to quickly echo, and I'm happy to share this resource with you, Precious, and you can share it with others. In California, where the fires have gotten worse and worse, community college, Santa Rosa Junior College, the IR office took the charge of reaching out to students and understanding the extent of the impact the fires had on the students and the employees, as well as what supports they needed. And they used that information. I think they had like record high response rate. I think within a number of days, they had over 1/3 of the student population actually respond to the survey. And I can share the survey instruments as well. But to Jenny's point, there is this kind of holistic nature of how do we understand what the role of the college can be in a situation as adverse as a natural disaster. And I'm sure in your respective spaces, you have managed aspects of these in a maybe a smaller scale or at that scale, but there's something about the kind of holistic role that the college can play depending on the way that the kind of resources are there to be able to do it. But I'll share that.
Yeah, yes, please, Priya. Thank you so much.
Yeah, I'm sorry, I'm going to talk again just for a second, but it makes me think about like, winter weather emergencies, and that, that's a really standard one. Like, okay, is the college open or is the college closed? Is my class canceled or not canceled? But to what extent do we think about how, prolonged cold, are students, do students need help? Are there heat? Do they have heat in their homes? Have they been involved in traffic accidents, or, are they not, are they snowed in, things like that? Maybe, maybe that's just me. This is a light bulb for me. I'm like, oh my God, we don't do that much. I mean, as much as we should, or maybe we do that. But my experience when I was working at a college was that was not the priority.
It wasn't a standard practice.
Yeah.
Right.
I think too, what complicates that, Jenny, in terms of outreach, I'm thinking back, you mentioned snow days and things like that. I'm thinking back to that year, 4, 5, 6 years ago, where we had that stretch of below 0, below 20 below temperatures and wind chills of what ridiculous negative numbers. We were all trying to keep our own houses up and running, and the polar vortex. Keeping our own homes up and running and protecting our own families and ourselves. And I know that the thought of reaching out and finding out what students' needs were was not in the forefront of our thinking. The same with the flood, everybody is impacted, not just our students. So that's a level of awareness that I think we need to develop.
I like how you put that. It's a level of awareness that we need to develop, which tells me it's a growth mindset and a way of approaching it. And there's something that we can do about it. We're not too far gone to make some changes. That's hopeful to me. Thank you for everything that you were sharing with each other and as well as in the large group. If you would love to go back into that Google document and look at those other breakout scenarios and share them as a potential exercise in fall trainings, you are more than welcome to do that and borrow this as you would need. I am going to switch gears and do some closing remarks because we do have some upcoming events and things that I want to make sure that you all are aware of. So we have a Project Lead Touch touch base with the project leads from My Best coming up July 29th. Public Policy and Associates, I really want to highlight this workshop, their webinar, excuse me. PPA is going to be sharing the results of the focus group that was facilitated at 4 institutions during the spring. And they're also going to be sharing the protocol that they specifically use to have successful focus groups, so that if you are interested in having focus groups at your institution, you have best practice on how to do that well. So mark your calendars for September 15th. And if you are able to do that right now, you could go ahead and register. We also have the Student Success Summit coming up. Woohoo! I can hear the cheers now. That's going to take place September 22nd to September 24th. We are going to be cheering virtually this year, and we welcome you all to register once that registration link goes live in August. We also have October 20th, 3 to 4, we're going to have another My Best webinar. And I want to do a reminder that the Student Financial Wellness Survey, they are offering institutions another opportunity to administer the survey. I know that the survey was administered last year, but last year was an unprecedented time. And so administering the survey this year a second time, though we don't necessarily do this particular survey each year, doing it this year may give you a more baseline idea of the needs of your students and the struggles and things that they might be navigating. And so it would be great comparative data to have for your institution and just to inform your practices as you go forward with this school year. So that Student Financial Wellness Survey invitation is open now, and you would need to communicate with Trellis Research by September to indicate your interest in administering that survey. And I will send another email out to make sure that that is communicated using those communication strategies we talked about this morning. Lastly, but certainly not least, my self-care challenge to you all is to identify and address some burnout. This is a hard period of time. I can speak for myself personally that sometimes I can feel zoomed out, and there's just a lot of change happening in our society and our world. And so if burnout is something that you are looking to overcome, here are some things that you can do to hopefully address some of that burnout. I did hear an awesome quote from Michael Ganger. He says that burnout is something that happens when you try to avoid being human for too long. So if you've avoided being human for too long, these are some things that you can do to make sure that your needs are being met. And I know it sounds really simple, but so impactful is asking for help. I asked for help this morning and I actually received it. And so it really lightened the load for me just to have someone come to my home and make sure that my son was taken care of, so I can make sure that I have my undivided attention to you all. I asked for help. Also think about setting clear and consistent boundaries, especially as we get in gear and preparation for the upcoming academic year. What boundaries are you going to make sure that you have in place? Think about exercise and how can you make that a priority? It releases some great endorphins. Orange Theory Fitness has been very kind to me. Pay attention to your needs. What are some things that have been neglected emotionally, spiritually, mentally, emotionally, physically, that you would like to give some additional attention to? Nourish your creative side. What is something that you could do that's just for you, that only benefits you? Is that being creative? If so, how can you make that a part of your weekly or monthly practices? And then the last strategy that you could use is identify the source of your burnout. What is causing you to feel overwhelmed or extremely tired? Whatever that source is, what boundaries could you put in place? How could you ask for help? Or how could you make sure that your needs are being vocalized, verbalized, and attended to? Thank you all for joining me. I welcome myself and my colleagues to you if we could ever be of any assistance and support. And I hope you have a great rest of your day. Thank you for your time. Have a good one, everyone.